Yo, I'm beauclair. I'm going to be doing something a bit different today. Be looking into how to make Serum presets, 808s for your own sound kits for underground sounds. Let's get into it. So the first sound I'm going to be showing you how to cook up is something like this. Don't worry too much about the tables. You can find heaps of tables online. This is a really good one if you look up Baker with a V custom tables. You'll find a stack for free. I'll also include in the downloads in the description a folder with some of the tables and bits and pieces for you guys to pick up if you'd prefer to use and follow along with the same sounds. And I'll probably put the presets I think in that folder as well once they're done. So here's the first sound we're making. It's a synth, a chord synth. So it sounds nice and full and everything. So what I'm going to do is just turn some stuff off. So this is what you start off with. I've got the wave position turned up just a tiny little bit on this table and start off with unison on done. So with the envelope with the synths, especially for chord synths, a lot of the time I don't change the envelope from the default. First thing we are going to touch, go into one of your LFOs, doesn't matter which one. Go to basic, so click on the little folder, go to basic and you'll find sign. Once you get sign, click and drag that LFO over to wavetable position here and just bring it up a little bit so it's like mine. And so far what that'll give you is like this sort of like. If you've got it set to bar, by default it'll be 1/4, which would be like, which is cool too. But yeah, I'm going to set it to bar so it's a bit longer and have it just so it like drags up and down on this wavetable position. Next, I'm going to crank the unison up to about 9. I'm going to have the blend right up and the detune to about 0.7. Drag this LFO over onto your detune as well. So I've already got it there, so I'm just going to remove the bypass. And then see this thing here? Flip it so it's like that. So it's going downwards. There's some more stuff you could do with this, but so far I'm pretty happy with it. What you could do is go to this thing here and get like a bend or PWM, or get like one of these ASIM things and just go to one of your like standard LFOs and just put this on there and turn it down a bit and just play around with having it go like super fast. Yeah, so that's really fast LFO thing. You can do that to the wavetable position too, and it gives you this really like thick sound with a really quick movement. So it just sort of sounds a bit more, like it brings out a bit of brightness in the synth. So we won't stuff around too much, I think, on here. We could add another oscillator, but I think for now we'll leave it at this one. You know, add in some hyper dimension on the effects, put the detune maybe about a quarter of the way up. Crank this to 6, hit the re-trigger and put the wet dry maybe to like 25, 30, then the distortion for some very light filtering. I'm going to use the ASIM distortion and put it on post, crank this little bar here up to a high pass and then just bring this out so it's like nice and rounded so it doesn't have like a big high resonance bump in it. Turn your drive up but turn your mix like a quarter of the way or something, like turn it right down and you start getting like. I'm going to add a chorus. I'm going to turn this chorus filter. It starts like here. I'm just going to turn it down a little notch. Keep the feedback at maybe 13%. Sounds good. I'm going to take the depths down a bit. Turn delay 2 up to like 4 seconds and just leave delay 1 and the rate where they are. And turn the mix down to about 30. Might even be less. If you crank it right up with the filter down a bit lower, you start to get this cool pad sound. And I'll show you through that in a pad preset in a sec, but you can get this like cool movement effect if you also then modulate this or maybe this. You get this cool sort of, like you modulate them in 2 different speeds as well with 2 different LFOs. You get this rad, very like nice movement. So yeah, I'm gonna turn this down a bit again and just move it to where it starts to sound good to you. We could like keep this preset. It sounds much better than it did before now. So now it sounds like this. Yeah, so I'm liking that. Sounds sick. See what it sounds like if we add another oscillator or something. I'm just winging it now. I had the rest set up in advance before, but put on oscillator 2 and let's chuck a filter on it. Crank the resonance up, move the filter up a bit, make it fat. I don't like how much more this oscillator seems to be getting affected by the distortion, so I might turn this down a bit. And then yeah, you could go nuts and have like if you just hold shift and do left click along here, you can make like a weird like pattern. And if you wanted to play around with the filter, you can do something like this for oscillator B. Let's go on to our next thing, which is going to be the lead. So what I've done with this one, this little wave, first I'm going to crank the unison up just a tiny bit. You don't want a spread with the leads. It depends on the sound you want to go for. If you want a really synthy lead, chuck some unison on and detune it a bit. But for this one, I'm going to put it at 5. We're going to take this little wave. So just make something like this, add a point here, and just curve it out like a wave. Very simple. Drag it over onto your wavetable position. Put it on envelope and maybe put it a little bit slower. I've got it on half a bar. And so yeah, remember to have it on envelope, otherwise it goes over and over. So we got some detune and some unison. Turn the detune down, turn the blend right up. We're gonna have the wavetable position modulated. I'm gonna use this trick again. I only put it on like 1/16 of a bar. So drag this triangle standard wavetable, crank the speed up a little bit. Let's put it on, I think the bend minus thing is good. And the way I'm getting that bendy sound is over here under voicing, click mono, turn this porter thing up until it makes you happy, and just move the curve either like down or up, so it's got a bit of a curve to the portamento, and then you can get something that sounds like this. So yeah, it's interesting so far. I'm gonna put another oscillator on. See, this one's got much more like of a high frequency to it, and it's got this real buzzy sounds. Cool, so filter on B and the sub. Let's turn the sub on, turn it up an octave and put it on the square, and just turn the level right down and put the filter on. So click on the filter, go to miscellaneous and pick like one of the formants. I've picked formant 2. I put the cutoff right up and put the resonance like nearly halfway up. I added some drive and I've just put the formant more than 2/3 of the way. And we could modulate that. Let's use something like this. These are just ones that I've saved. Let's add another LFO. Let's go again to just get like a standard LFO. Then we're gonna get the pan on this one on oscillator 2. Let's crank it up to 8 and let's make it like kind of just a little bit wide. Let's do the same thing. I don't think it's gonna make much difference, but let's just invert the triangle on this one. Put it on oscillator 1 and make it a bit smaller and make it faster. We'll take the one that's doing the pan on this one and put it on the fine on this one and just put the fine tuning down a bit. So this will make it a bit wonky. Let's take the one that's doing the pan on this one and put it over onto the sub and make it a bit wider. Alright, I'm liking how that sounded. Let's go with some hyperdimension. Let's get one of these weird LFOs and put it on the frequency of the phaser. So we just added all these weird little textures. They don't like make much of the actual sound itself. It's still the core oscillators giving you like most of the noise, but they just got these weird little like bubbles and clicks, and adding those things onto different pans and onto the fine just like brings out this stereo effect in the whole thing. Let's just play that little lead with the synth preset that I've got. Move on to something a bit different. I'll show you how to make an 808 in Serum. I just saved this little like preset for myself. So I sort of pre-cook this one up because it can be a bit of stuffing around sometimes. So what you want to do is go to your tables, go to analog, get a BD sign, And I like to turn the wavetable up so that it's got a little tiny bit of like saturation. The basic sine wave is like a really pure sound. If you turn this up a bit, it just gives you like a slightly cooked sine wave. Turn the octave down to 2 or 3 depending what sort of 808 you're looking to make, and just get your ADSR to look a bit like this, like turn the hold up a bit. Just think of like what the 808s usually look like when you're looking at a waveform. They've got a bit of hold, like a big fat bit after it comes in. They've got like some decay. Then they've usually got like a faded out tail, and then it just comes to personal preference how much of that tail you want to add in. Get this LFO and make like a tiny little wave like this. So get a point here, then put a point here, and just play around with these little notches. Get this one and just drag it like right down. So you get yourself this nice tiny little wave, and drag it over onto the course here. Then go into the matrix, and it'll probably be on, I think it's bipolar by default, but you want it on unipolar. So if you just left click it, it'll change the arrow. So you want the arrow that's only facing one way. Uni means one way, unipolar, and just put it here and have it so it's going up, and just put it around about like 8 or 9 or 10. And then make this quite quick. So what you get is this kick effect. I like to put a bit of this like MG low 6 filter, crank the fat right up, crank the drive up a bit, and just turn the cutoff right up so it's not really cutting off. And that just allows you to, like, rather than keep trying to crank up the levels because the 808 is quite quiet, you can add some extra like fullness in there by using this filter and just not having any cutoff on it. So put lots of fat and a bit of drive, turn the mix right up. No resonance, no cutoff, brings out a bit of the harmonics. So what I usually do is go to distortion as well and add in, we'll go with this like asim distortion again because I like it. It's really good for 808s, but as you see, if we flick through, you can make a bunch of different 808s just by playing with like the length, how fast the kick goes, if you make it really slow. And just like using different distortions as well. 0 square and downsample are really sick. And then I just put some compressor on usually just to control the gain. Turn the threshold down a little bit, turn the attack down pretty low, the release down, and have the comp ratio on about 3.1 and turn the gain up. It's mostly just doing this for the gain. Today I'm going to leave it off, but yeah, that's just a little tip of something I like to add in sometimes. Take that and chuck it on a mixer track. And so these first 3 things that I've added on the track are just to like clean up and make it loud. So just soft clip the limiter. Nothing special going on here. I've added some saturation, I've turned the gain up, and I've turned the ceiling so it sits sort of just on top of the wave. I've just put this parametric EQ on here just to cut off a tiny bit of the low end. Here's where you can get into some funky stuff, and this is where I can make like 2 different 808s with the one sample so far. I usually just, no matter what, add this Shaperbox preset. If you go into all and filter by compressor in Shaperbox 3 and just scroll down until you find ones with only the compressor, the orange dot. Parallel comp's good. Comp for glue, drum compressors alright, limiter, make it loud. So for the first 808 sound we're going to do, add Shaperbox 3. I've got this saved as a preset, goes for 1 bar. So I just got this little dip here at the start. It starts off with a bit of like a side chain and then fades out a bit. I just play around with adding like a really small amount of crush, moving the band a little bit usually so it's only on the bass and the mid and not too much on the high. I pull this down, if you pull this down a tiny bit and then just play around with the resample until you find something you like, and maybe play around with the treble a bit as well. Then this is the fun part. Usually start adding some drive. For this case, I'm gonna add soft clip. You can get really crazy and go for the skews. It starts getting pretty wild with that. And so I've just got the drive up to like less than 50, and I've turned the mix down a bit, and I pull this grip thing up. I pull this accent and the tone, play around with them until I get something I like. So this is the 808 that we've got now with this. One of those like cool no attack sort of 808s. And to get another 808 sound out of this same sample, I'm going to turn off this compressor, the sidechain. I'm going to turn off this crush. I'll leave the drive on. So I'll leave this Shaperbox on, and Fruity Wave Shaper. And I just go through here and just pick a preset that sounds sick. And then I usually just like adjust the mix of it. So now with the crush and the sidechain turned off and this Fruity Wave Shaper added in, now we have an 808 that sounds like this. So those are just some ideas of how you can get some different 808s. Of course, you can play around with the holds. So for this one, maybe we could have like a longer 808. So yeah, that was the one sound, and this was the other one without the kick sound. I like this a lot more. This sounds sick. When you're done with that, just drop an Edison down the bottom so it picks up everything that's in the load order above it. Normalize it, trim thing. Right click this so you can fade it in and out. If you left click it, you get this. So yeah, this is the final result. Moving on to the last thing I want to show you. I sort of already set this up. I won't go into details of the tables, the modulations that I'm using. I just mentioned earlier that there is something I wanted to show you with the chorus for things like pads and synths. I've got these two different LFOs. To make this, hold shift and left click. You can drag, and then you can just like shift and left drag this sort of around, and I like to do sort of patterns like this. If you look at other people's banks, a lot of people have got these sort of square gated patterns. They're really fun. So I've got them both on bar, and they're just slightly different. They're almost like reversed in a way. So take one of them and chuck it on the low pass filter for the chorus. Adjust the mix. So I've got these like on other things as well, like the filter cutoff and the wavetable position. But yeah, essentially you go from something like to adding the chorus in, and you get this sound. And you could make this like real slow if you wanted to. Drag it down to 4 bars. And yeah, that's it. Put a download link in the description below for you guys, like tables and probably these presets and maybe that 808 or something, and maybe I'll throw in some other goodies that you can play around with. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and hopefully you can now cook up your own Serum banks, use whatever tables or resources I drop in to reverse engineer or just to steal, and flip your own stuff out of it. Thanks for watching. Hit the like and the subscribe and all that shit. Thank you. Cheers.